Hi, everyone. I am Beverly Vogt, publisher of the Breast Cancer Wellness Magazine, and this is an extension of our series on what breast cancer survivors need to know about clinical trials. And I'm joined again by Stacy Lewis, who is let me get your title again, Chief Program Officer, yes, at Young Survivors Coalition. Am I close? Stacy, give us some real brief information about the Young Survivors Coalition and also your website, if you will.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, once again, Beverly, thank you for inviting me and Young Survival Coalition to co-host this important webinar series with you and Breast Cancer Wellness Magazine. We're extremely honored at the opportunity because we believe that the information about clinical trials is important to the entire cancer community and for us to that population of young adults dealing with the diagnosis of breast cancer. So YSC was founded about 22 years ago, and our mission continues to be identifying the unique needs of the young adult population dealing with the breast cancer diagnosis, and making sure that we're amplifying their voice to policymakers, researchers, etc. So information about our virtual programs and all of our resources can be found at youngsurvival.org. And we're looking forward to this conversation with you and Dr. Len. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. And today we have with us Dr. Len Lichtenfeld, and he is the former, let me see if I'm getting this correct, former Deputy Chief Medical Officer of the American Cancer Society, and he has decades of service in this cancer space. So we are very honored to have him with us today. Thank you for your time and your commitment to this session, on this virtual summit. So there's so much talk right now about COVID. I mean, we're really in an unusual situation in our history with COVID. So let's start off with how COVID has changed clinical trials. And welcome to the virtual summit. Thank you, Dr. Len.
Well, Beverly and Stacy, it's a real pleasure to be with both of you and also with your viewers and listeners, and appreciate the work that you are all doing to help bring awareness and knowledge about breast cancer to this country and frankly throughout the world. It's a very important topic, and it's a very important, obviously, to the hearts of many who are joining us in this session. COVID's had huge impact. Go back to where we were in February and March, and we literally knew nothing or very little about COVID and what happened. And at that time, we went into the shutdowns, and that was very appropriate, to be honest, from my perspective, because we were dealing with a deadly disease. And a deadly disease where we actually felt at that time that for cancer patients, whether they be in active treatment or shortly after treatment, were a particular vulnerability, not to mention the fact that many cancer patients are in the older age groups and have other conditions. So COVID, we're going to talk about clinical trials, but fundamentally COVID disrupted the entire cancer care enterprise. We recommended at the American Cancer Society at the time to not go for screening, and that was for a variety of reasons, at least for people at average risk. And let's remember, some people are at higher risk, some are at average risk. And parallel to that, cancer care itself for people in active treatment. We actually got phone calls at that time while I was at the American Cancer Society of people had their treatment interrupted. And that was very difficult. Surgeries were delayed. And clinical trials were put on the shelf, not completely, but for the most part. And many clinical trials, quite honestly, were not started. They were suspended from starting at that point because of what we knew and what we feared and what we didn't know at that point in time. Fast forward, we've learned a lot more about COVID. We learned a lot more about how to care for patients with COVID. We learned some more. We're still going to learn a lot more about the impact of COVID on patients with cancer. Not everything has been so clear cut. Some studies have suggested that cancer patients, in fact, do have very serious outcomes if they're infected. Other studies have suggested that that's not the case. But for clinical trials, which is the topic of our conversation, it still remains problematic. Let's, again, the people with cancer, for the most part, are older. They are at higher risk. Although the centers have opened and are recruiting patients, not everyone can travel to a center to get clinical trials. So that's the difficult part. On the other side, remember, in every difficult situation, there's always something that's positive. On the other side, doctors, staff, nurses, and of course, patients, their loved ones, their families, they figured workarounds for some things. So maybe people don't have to travel to a center every time they need to see a clinician for a clinical trial. Maybe they can get the drugs at home. Maybe now the FDA and the trial coordinators can loosen up a little bit and allow some of the blood tests and the various the X-rays, the studies, the radiology studies that have to be done. Maybe they can be done closer to home. So accommodations are being made. Things are beginning to open up. And of course, the big question is, well, if we can make these accommodations today, and at the time we're having this conversation, things unfortunately look like they're getting a bit worse. If we can make those accommodations today, then why not continue them for the future too? So we have difficulties, but we're going to learn some positives and hopefully be able to improve the clinical trial experience for patients and for the centers that offer those trials, because they too face barriers in the normal circumstances. Maybe we can make that a little bit easier going forward.
Okay, so let's go back up just a little bit. How have clinical trials evolved through the years prior to COVID?
Well, prior to COVID was a long, long time.
Prior to COVID.
Let me be careful that I don't take you back on too far a journey, but it's an actually there's a bit of instructive information there that people may not be aware of. I started my cancer career, believe it or not, in the early 1970s. And when we did a clinical trial, I was at the National Cancer Institute, we were very careful to make sure what we were doing was appropriate, but we didn't have to jump through a lot of hoops to start studying a drug in cancer patients. We did not have detailed institutional review boards. We didn't have a lot of reporting requirements. We obviously paid attention to what we call it today, human protections, but things were a lot different than they are now. Fast forward today, and over time, clinical trials have gotten a lot more difficult. A lot more requirements have been put into place. Some of them are very valid. Let's understand, human protections are something we need. We need to make sure that people that they have protections in place, that the monitoring is in place, that the studies are properly done, that the trial is appropriate. But we've gone from one end, perhaps so far to the other end, in terms of putting so many requirements in place that we limit the centers or the places where patients can get into trials. We always hoped, when we started the Cancer Institute, we didn't have a lot of oncology in the country. We had almost none. And most people were treated at the Cancer Institute or a truly major cancer center. And now cancer care is all over the country. But having said that, we still put too few people on clinical trials. That seems, a small percentage, I don't know what the percentage today, maybe 4% or 5% of patients get on a clinical trial. And we have so many drugs, so many treatments, so many alternatives coming through the pipeline that, and frankly, today I heard a comment that there were 1,700 trials around genetic-related therapy in line. I think that's what it was said. I can tell you past research showed 3,000 to 4,000 immunotherapy trials. Well, we don't have enough ability in this country to do that. So we're studying a lot of things. And that brings up another point. COVID may take us down a path that maybe we don't need to do every trial. We need to do trials that are important, that really are going to make a difference. Not a trial that's just going to, what we call a Me Too drug, something that's similar. We need trials that are going to make a real difference in patients' lives. Maybe we, on the professional side, the doctors, the researchers, the scientists, maybe we can pay, and the pharmaceutical companies can pay a little bit more attention, because ultimately patients are our most precious resource. Without patients and families committing to trials, we wouldn't get anything done. Right. And if we're going to make progress in the care of patients with cancer, we need to be a team, all of us together, to make this happen. So we have lots of trials out there Many of them close because they can't get enough patients. We need some more wisdom about what we should be doing to really make cancer, the outcome for patients with cancer, the quality, not only the length of their lives, but the quality of their lives, to make all of that better, to make it the best it can possibly be, even sometimes, unfortunately, under very difficult circumstances.
I think that was such an excellent answer, because part of the challenge, to your point, is about patient access, right? So to your point of making even the necessary lab work and monitoring more geographically accessible would be an advantage. And I know as a patient advocacy organization, we're always trying to amplify the voice of the patient to professionals like yourself. So if there's any tips, any thoughts that you have about how we can continue to partner, we agree with you 100%. It is a partnership between patient advocacy, researchers, those in the clinic, all of us working together, legislators. It's such an important combination. And so if there are any thoughts that you have or any tips that you have of how we can continue to amplify the patient voice, making sure that these barriers are continuing to be addressed, even in the early processes of clinical trial development, that would be helpful for the audience to hear.
So let me share with you that the American Cancer Society, and again, I'm no longer affiliated, but I certainly was for over 19 years. The American Cancer Society actually brought together a coalition of patient advocacy organizations that, from my perspective, was really effective and is still continuing to be effective to move forward to try to address some of the barriers. So, number one, patient advocacy organizations are the voice of the patient. They should be. Now, maybe some aren't, but they should be the voice of the patient. And one of the, and voice is a two-way street. Voice is into not only up the upstream, that is to the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA and the university centers, but it's also a communication into the community. Absolutely. And let's be very, very blunt here. Some communities are highly suspicious of clinical trials, and they're highly suspicious of clinical trials because of very real, deeply felt, heartfelt reasons. They're not suspicious because they're just suspicious. They're suspicious for good reason. And those discussions, that openness has to occur because everyone should have access to a clinical trial, and everyone should have a sense that their interests are being looked over and appropriate. So we need to have those communications between all the parties come together, number one. Number two, engagement with the organizations that are responsible for the clinical trials. So yeah, I belong to professional organizations like the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network. That's not a place necessarily where patients are going to have a voice, but the point I'm trying to make is it's the community and it's the profession who have been very concerned about some of the barriers, and they move up to the pharmaceutical companies and they move to the FDA. So, for example, people with cancers, I mentioned before, tend to be older, and a lot of the clinical trials have requirements in place that no longer make any sense, or if they make sense that they can be noted and looked at as part of the trial process, but not to exclude people from trials. And it's not just true in cancer, it's true of medicine in general. I will tell you that some of the even notwithstanding that cancer is a terrible and serious disease, some of the when the numbers are put down on a piece of paper, some of the people have the best numbers. I've never seen such healthy patients in cancer clinical trials. I mean, they're all healthy. They don't have real life illnesses. Comment was made there's a commentary, a little article came out in a journal called JAMA Oncology recently. And it made the point, for example, about HIV. Patients with HIV are not allowed to be in a clinical trial, where the companies may exclude them, or whoever designs the trial may exclude them. And yet, if they have no detectable virus, why should they be excluded? people who may have a slightly elevated blood test, a kidney function test. Right. Do they have to be excluded? People who may have a little bit of heart problem, do they have to be excluded? You know, when you get down the line with a clinical trial, you want to make sure it works in the real world. So I think advocacy organizations have some very real opportunities. Communication with their communities, and make sure that their communities have communication to them that things are, you know, if there's a problem, it needs to be addressed. Communication with the cancer centers in the area to make sure, you know, people need to say, what can we do to work together to make something happen? And it may be a matter of a community engagement, genuine community engagement, not what I call helicopter, not flying in, we want you to be on a trial and then see you later. No, I mean genuine community engagement with community leaders, community voices, community people. That's important. And I mentioned with the FDA. The FDA has outreach and they have listening sessions. And being the voice of the patient at the table is very real for them. And I think that advocacy organizations can play a genuine role. And of course, as I mentioned, the coalitions that come up, you know, the community is not going to be able to solve every problem, but when they need community representatives in the various, not boards, but various committees that look at trials or make decisions, stand up and be counted. Because if you don't, we all know that if you don't engage and you don't have mutual respect, you don't have an effective solution. And I think that's the biggest role that many advocacy organizations can play.
Stacy and I both are, Stacy's in the young survivor space. And I too serve that in a different capacity than Stacy does, but I was diagnosed young. So it's encouraging to me to hear that there's so many clinical trials on the horizon. You know, you spoke earlier about, you know, some of them being for older, you know, cancer survivors, but Stacy and I see women and men being diagnosed younger and younger week in and week out. So I'm encouraged to hear that there's so many clinical trials on the horizon.
Well, you know, so I'm going to give my standard message, which is not a clinical trial message. If you're a young woman, and frankly, a young man for that matter, because men do get breast cancer.
Yes.
If you're a young woman and you feel a change in your breast, don't say, I'm a young woman, this can't happen to me. Please, and I'm sure the same message that you deliver constantly.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid to go, what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, the worst thing that happens, nobody's going to look at you like you're crazy. If you see a change or feel a change, get things taken care of. That's really important. And let me share something with you. I had a phone call. I won't get into too much detail. I had a phone call with a young man the other day whose wife, unfortunately, is probably near the end of her journey. And his personal recrimination and sense of guilt that what he could have done more. We talked quite a bit. We talked quite a bit about not only the illness, but also about love, life, and respect. Wow. Because no one can give more. I mean, you know, we all want everything to be wonderful, but sometimes it's not. Knowing there's someone there who loves and cares for you is so critically important. But, you know, it comes back and you know, one of the things, and it was actually, I hope that conversation helped, and I want to share that with everyone here. So you start with awareness. You don't say it's not about me. And let's talk about one of the clinical trials that made a huge impact, if not the greatest impact. I won't say the greatest, that's a relative term. There are a lot of impacts in breast cancer. The treatment of women with HER2-positive breast cancer. HER2-positive breast cancer was a disease of younger women, not young women, maybe young women, but it was younger women.
Right.
And look at, I don't know if you can appreciate today the huge impact that treatment it was about 2003, 2004 when it became publicly available. The research went on years before that. If you have an opportunity to be part of a trial like that, and particularly now we have these genomic therapies based on the genes of a particular cancer. We have to, you know, these genes are not exactly common genes. They're rare. We have some treatments now for 1,500 people a year in the United States will be diagnosed, or 1,500, 2,500. That's the total number of patients who will develop a cancer with that particular genetic abnormality.
Right.
If you have a chance to be part of a trial of something like that, we need to find the patients where they are. And the other point I would make in some communities, particularly in the Black community, that breast cancer tends to be younger, right? It compared to the white community, and the mortality rate is higher.
Right.
Right. And so, particularly for Black women who I hope are listening to this, it's so important to be aware. And don't say it's fate or God's will, please, because that's another theme that unfortunately Beverly has been around long enough to have heard that. Stacy, I hope you haven't heard that much of it. But I will tell you from my experience, another thing I want to put it on the table was a sense of fatalism. I can't do anything about it. You can do something about it. Do it. So awareness, if you have the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, please consider it. Most important, get the care you need. Don't drop the ball, because we can talk about trials and we can talk about this, we can talk about that. Ultimately, be your advocate, and don't, and the barriers will be thrown in your way. Surmount the barriers, make the phone call, talk to your clinicians, make sure you get the care that you need and the care you should have. I think it's
the care you deserve.
Well, I was going to say exactly that, and yes, you took the words literally right out of my mouth.
Sorry, we're all on the same page.
But no, I think it's so important. It's so important because we do better with regard to cancer care today than we did 30, 40, 50 years ago. But I got to tell you something. If we did what we already know, we could do even so much better. And that's the frustrating part. The clinical trials is a very real part of that because that advances knowledge. But the day-to-day care, you need to be an advocate, and you need to be your family together to work to make sure you get the best care you can.
Stacy and I are both on the same page about it's all about helping women take the next best step forward for themselves, what's best for them. And in this whole discussion about clinical trials, it's to remind women there are choices out there, and they need to make that decision based on, it's got to be a personal decision, and if it feels right and it's something they want to be a part of. I've learned so much through this virtual summit and about the quality of care while you're in a clinical trial. And so we're going to be promoting this virtual summit all year long for 12 months. We'll do a part 2 probably in February, but this information is that important, and hopefully we won't be having as much a discussion about COVID in the future, but what we learn from it, and what we can, take the best of the bad situation and improve healthcare and improve people being their own advocate and speaking up, asking for help. But both Stacy and I are involved in helping women understand that there are so many other things they can do. The feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, we're trying to bridge that.
So Beverly, if I may, if I have a moment here, let me address some of that. First off, let's understand that health facilities, medical facilities, almost all of them are or certainly should be doing everything they can to keep patients safe. If you sense, and sometimes you may sense if you walk in someplace and you're concerned, that's not, that's something that you need to address and talk about. But we're seeing research reports now about hospitals and about clinics and the incidence of COVID in the clinic as a result of a clinic visit, and they're very, very, very low. And we're now in a surge part of the pandemic again. And I'm hopeful that a year from now we will have a vaccine, and hopefully our behaviors will be such that we know what we need to do for ourselves to keep ourselves safe. So I do think that if someone is ill, has breast cancer, and they're part of a clinical trial, they should move forward with it, number one. Number two, I'm on the advisory board for a company called Trialjectory, which I think has some role in supporting these seminars. And Trialjectory is an example of a company that makes access to clinical trials, information about clinical trials available to anyone around the country. we don't know, and it's a different world. You don't have to sit in your doctor's office with your doctor or a nurse practitioner or another clinician talking about clinical trials. You can go online and find out about them yourself, no matter where you are. Mm-hmm. If patients drive that behavior, then people will be more responsive. And then there's the other piece, which I mentioned before, about this opportunity to democratize trials in the communities around the country that may not have had that opportunity before. And let's not forget that there are many terrific organizations, Stacy's organization, the magazine, Breast Cancer Wellness, and American Cancer Society. I happen to be on the board of an organization called Cancer Care that provides support and help for patients with cancer. There are there are many terrific organizations out there that can help answer questions. You got a question, make a call. Well, the internet, but you also make a call and get your questions answered, because nobody's going to look after you as well as you can look after yourself, or a member of your family included in that will help look after you. So usually it's the young daughters who get on the internet and they get all the information together. God bless them. God bless them.
Sister.
And for all that's right. And for all you older folks out there who say, I don't know, you got somebody in your family who can help you out. And then I bet you they'd be glad to do it.
Mm-hmm. I think those comments are so spot on. In my head, I was saying, wow, I wonder if we can hire him as our PR guy. I do have one question.
You don't have to hire me. I'm glad to help you, just like you're doing it right now.
I do have one question, thinking specifically about clinical trials, the cancer population, and COVID. Do you think that part of the approach, as you talked about or alluded to a vaccine, do you think that that there will be trials that are looking at the vaccine in the cancer community? YSC was at the beginning of the pandemic, in that we were scheduled to have our annual summit, 700 people coming to LA in the beginning of March. And so we got there, and long story short, postponed the meeting because the thought about bringing our cancer community together for support and education amidst what then became a pandemic was frightening. And we felt that would be, of course, irresponsible, and we certainly want to protect our community. So now we're thinking about, how will we know, how will the research community, as it relates to COVID and this vaccination process, how will we know its impact on the cancer community, people that are either in treatment or just coming out of treatment, its efficacy, its safety, et cetera? Sorry, that was a big question. And so
that's question. Okay. It's a great question. There are two parts to the question. One, let's talk about, and I won't take a long time. There's a lot we could say. What's the impact of COVID on the cancer community? I'm going to share with you right now. There's some uncertainties in answering that. The studies that first came out of China, from Wuhan, China, suggested that patients with cancer, even those who had completed treatment years before, the impact was severe. That has not been the uniform observation along the way. So we're still learning. We're learning about immunotherapy in cancer. Does it make it worse? Does it make it better? Does it make any difference at all? So all those questions, we will be studying COVID and all of its impacts for years to come, for a while. Number one. Number two, excellent question about the efficacy of the vaccine. I can't speak specifically to cancer. I should be able to, but I can't. But I will tell you that I'm sure all of the trials, we've moved through various phases of trials in the vaccines, the way we do with cancer care. We start off with a couple of healthy volunteers, then we take a larger number to see, again, if it still has any adverse impacts, plus what happens with the antibody production. Now, for some of these trials are moving into phase 3. These trials, we have not seen all the vaccines against COVID. We've not seen all of them yet. We're going to be developing vaccines for, I won't say years to come, but certainly for the foreseeable future. New candidate vaccines will be coming along. The first ones may be okay, they may be good, but they won't be perfect. The next ones will be better. Not to mention the technologies that are used in making these vaccines. In the flu, the original vaccines everybody's familiar with, you took a virus, You either killed the virus or you fixed the virus so it wouldn't cause an infection, and then you moved it through the trials, right? We call it live attenuated vaccine. Now we're taking fragments of RNA, which is complicated gene material, too much to get into here, and we're trying to make a vaccine to stimulate the immune system without giving you the virus, giving it a live virus. So there are all these different technologies that are out there, and all of them should be looking at cancer patients. However, I will tell you that there's no doubt in my mind that the bulk of the patients are going to be relatively healthy, reflecting the community. Sure. There will be some who get some people with chronic illnesses such as cancer who will get the vaccine considered in a separate group. Will it be big enough to answer the question that you appropriately and wisely asked, Stacy? No, I don't think so. I don't think it'll be enough, and we'll be learning as we go. So I will say stay tuned on that one. I wish I had a better answer, and I suspect somebody's going to see this video and say, oh, why didn't he know this or know that? I don't know everything. But I will tell you that guiding patients with cancer and through the beginning of this pandemic was very, very difficult because everyone's focused on, let's call it the top line, the population at large. And the specific information about cancer was slow to come out. Now that's speeding up, but there's still a lot we don't know. There's still more we have to learn. So the vaccine question is real. Even today, an influenza vaccine, you have to be careful if you're a patient under treatment with cancer. There's a space where your family around you really helps if they get an influenza vaccine. And everybody who can get, if you're a cancer patient, you want to know, talk to your doctor. Or websites like the cancer.org, the American Cancer Society has information on flu to see whether or not you can get a flu vaccine, but especially those around you should be vaccinated. And the same thing may be true of COVID. The most important people for patients with cancer right now are their families and those that they meet with, because that's the ring of protection for somebody who unfortunately is ill or maybe taking intensive therapy for their cancer. You want to do everything you can to avoid that risk. Right.
No, I think honest information about where we are, everybody is totally familiar now, unfortunately, with the level of uncertainty and information constantly evolving. And so I appreciate that open and candid answer. And I think it's very empowering for the cancer community to really know, where this whole situation impacts them and what they can expect in the near and then longer term future. So
I think it's a great question. I think it's one that should be amplified to other sources. So let's see what we can do with that to get a better answer.
Love to.
And wrapping up, what would each of you like to share? What would we like to see on the horizon in this space?
Stacy, I'm going to allow, I want you to go first, and then I'll wrap up.
Great. Okay. So what I would like to see is, Dr. Len talked about basically the disparities that are existing in cancer morbidity, in cancer mortality, in the long-term health outcomes. And I would like to see us collaboratively and collectively be able to break down the information to populations and communities that are not participating in clinical trials to a degree where we can really see the needle move on that participation, because I think the more diversity we have in clinical trials, the more we'll know about efficacy of every product out there and products in development, and we'll begin to see improved health outcomes for all of us.
So I couldn't agree more. And I want to say something that I hope everybody understands. A lot of people who make a lot of decisions about healthcare and clinical trials, whatever, think the world is like us. The people that surround them. I say us, I mean the generic us, the people who are around. That's how they relate to the world. They don't relate to people who have issues with literacy through no fault of their own. They don't relate to people who have trouble with what we call numeracy, understanding numbers. We can sit there and say, well, if you take this drug, you have 50% less chance. This is relative absolute risk. All that's foreign. We need to have conversation. So we need to have conversations. We need to have commitment. We need to have a two-way street. And it starts with fundamentally understanding health in the terms that the community understands health, and build from there. And this is not a new topic. I'm not sitting here today because I'm on the video with you and all of our viewers saying these nice things. These have been heartfelt for me and my colleagues and my friends, frankly, we talk about these issues all the time. They won't be solved by one person or two people. They're going to be solved by communities.
Right.
And so if we're going to make progress in cancer care, if we're going to make progress in clinical trials, if we're going to make progress in access to care, if we're going to make sure that somebody who starts care can afford to continue and complete their care, if we're going to make sure that somebody pays attention, that you count, and then if you don't show up for your office visit, finds out, why didn't you show up for your office visit? What can we do to make it better? If we have those kinds of conversations, we'll be in a better place, and we'll solve a lot of. We won't solve issues; there are always going to be issues, right? But we'll make it a better place, and particularly when it comes to clinical trials, we need to make sure people understand and have faith and belief that that's a good thing, and not look at it as something that's beyond their capacity. They can't get to it, or they don't trust it. We need to rebuild. We need to take these moments in this point in time to build trust, to build engagement, and bring us all, particularly when it comes to cancer, among many other issues, to a much better place than where we are today.
Continually educating and reaching out.
Yes.
Well,
advocating and creating awareness and commitment and engagement, and advocacy is key in that. But advocacy starts with individuals.
Yes. Absolutely. Fabulous.
I salute you both. Thank you both very much. Thank you both very much. And I look forward to sharing this. And I bless you for your work. Thank you very much.
And you as well. So thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you, Beverly. And thank you, Dr. Len. Such a wonderful opportunity. Thank you both.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.